Good morning, everyone. Welcome to UNSW campus and on these beautiful lands of the Digital people. Learning has taken place on these lands for millennia. It's wonderful to be able to carry on that tradition here today. Welcome to you all. Kevin Fox, I'm the Director of the Centre for Applied Economic Research here. I'm also on the Executive Leadership Team of ESCoE, so I have the opportunity to welcome you on both of those capacities. We have a wonderful program, but just a couple of things. First, all catering is going to be in the open space out there. Bathrooms are just around the corner. There are 3 lecture theatres here, A, B, and C, and all the events in the conference are in those 3 rooms. So you don't have to go far, there's no moving to another building or anything like that. In case of emergencies, please just run out of here screaming and shouting. Get away from the building as soon as possible. If you need any assistance, you'll see people with the ESCoE t-shirts on. Please see them if you need any help. Okay, so I think we're about ready to kick off. So I'm going to hand over now to Paul Schreier. Some of you might remember Paul as Director of Statistics for the OECD. He's now got the role of Director of Research and Engagement for ESCoE. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you. Yes.
But on, we have a wonderful dean here. Rewind. It's kind of like a joke thing. You've got the dean to come and not introduce him. Yes, welcome to Frederick Ansel, who's our wonderful dean in this business school. I won't say any more than that. Over to you, Frederick. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, I thought that was a very bold move. I have the pleasure also to welcome you in Sydney at UNSW and at UNSW Business School. It is a pleasure to see you all here. I know Sydney is for a lot of people far away, and it's long travel, and I know that a lot of people will be jet lagged probably in the room here. We're immensely grateful for making the effort of coming here, and I know it's very well attended, and it's, I think, unusual to have so many distinguished guests, heads, directors of national statistics offices and economic statistics offices here in the room. And I don't know if that is a sign that the field is thriving, or you're just seeking shelter from all the storms in the media and what is happening. I do think there's strength in numbers and in the collective and coming together and sharing experiences and sharing insights. And that is also something that we want to do here at UNSW Business School. As the Dean of the Business School, you'll forgive me for sort of promoting what we do in the Business School a bit. As many other universities and business schools, our strategy is very much focused on impact, right? It's not a coincidence that one of the taglines of our business school is ideas that matter. It's a bit trendy these days to talk about impact, but sometimes also a bit misunderstood in the sense that people are focused sort of on headlines and making sort of studies that make an immediate impact in newspapers. And often, for instance, our own vice chancellor will call me and say, Frederick, what is the news of the day? What can we announce? And I say, well, we don't have anything to announce, because I think it's often misunderstood that impact is the result of sustained effort. Research that often is not very visible, and sustained effort over years and sometimes decades, right? And I think, Kevin, what you're doing here in the business school, with the research center, with the conference, is something that is exactly what we mean with sort of focusing on ideas that matter and creating impact over years and over decades, right? Maybe economic measurement is not always the most sexy topic, but we think it's tremendously important. And we know that if we look at just what is happening across the world and sort of the newspapers, the importance of valid measurement, having economic statistics to use for economic policy, it is so important. And I think the work that you've been doing, and also the way you've been doing it by collaborating with policymakers, with governments, that is, I think, what we want to do is sort of the joint effort of academic research with government and policymakers. That is exactly what the business school stands for. And people, it is probably not a coincidence there that I may sort of also announce that Professor Fox was last week or 2 weeks ago recognized also by the business school with a Research for Societal Impact Excellence Award for sustained excellence over years in this type of research. So congratulations. We are very proud to have you among our faculty, and this is what the business school makes great. I hope you have a great conference, sharing lots of knowledge and insights. I'll stay around for half an hour, but then I need to move to another meeting. Thank you again for all joining the conference, and have a great conference. Thank you.
Frederick, thank you for that wonderful opening. Apologies for earlier, but you may want to comment about economic measurement perhaps not being so sexy. I mean, look around here. Thanks very much, Frederick. Now I think it's safe to introduce Paul. We won't do that again.
That's fine. Try it. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Paul Schreier. I'm the ESCoE Research Director, and it's great to be back here in Sydney and meet so many familiar faces. It's a particular pleasure for me to introduce Vipin Arora, who is the head of the Bureau of Economic Analysis. As most of you will know, the BEA is one of the key statistical agencies in the US, producing, among other things, the national income and product accounts, so the quarterly and annual GDP, and many other things come out of his organization. We will be talking about GDP and the system of national accounts quite a bit in this conference. Vipin's talk is actually not specifically about that. He takes a broader look at the work program of the BEA, including some historical backflashes, which I found particularly interesting, but he will also talk about the more strategic approaches, issues about quality assurance, how to trade off between timeliness, accuracy, granularity, issues that basically all statistic agencies are facing these days. So it will be a very pertinent presentation, I'm sure. In terms of the organization of the keynote, this will be fairly straightforward. So Vipin will be talking for about half an hour, 35, 40 minutes. We got 75 minutes overall. I've already wasted 5, so that will still leave enough time for questions and answers afterwards. On that, welcome again, Vipin, and over to you.
All right, well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. I want to start by just really expressing my gratitude to Kevin in particular, but to ESCoE and everyone, who organized the conference. It's my first time, and it's already been so impressive to see kind of how easily and smoothly this conference and everything around it has been put together. In fact, I feel like sometimes I'm an ESCoE cheerleader. Rebecca, I want to thank you as well, because I sometimes will go around and honestly, I'm a huge fan of ESCoE. I love the work that comes out of there. I love the model. These guys right here are laughing at my joke. That's why I brought them in there, right? But the model of ESCoE is something that I've said before that I'd like to replicate in the United States. Because I think I just like the way it's broken down. I think that a lot of important work comes out of there. But Rebecca, I want to thank you, and I want to thank all the organizers for that as well. I do also, I'm going to hesitantly, Frederick, thank UNSW. And I'll tell you a quick story that has nothing to do with my talk, but the reason I'm hesitant in actually thanking you, and so Kevin, I should have told you this when you and I were talking to set up, but I think I think I probably owe the university a little bit of money, which I, so I'm going to tell you again. It's a tangential story, but I was, and this is pre-Sydney Olympics. I was, I was finishing up my degree. My first degree was in engineering in the U.S. And my brother one day, and I'm almost done, right? I'm almost done with my degree. And my brother comes, and he's a very charismatic fellow, this guy, right? And he's like, you know what? I've heard Australia's great. We got to go down there and check it out, see what's it about. The beaches are great. You know, all the things you hear about Australia always, right? And I was like, no, I got to finish. I'm tired. I want to make some money. I'm tired of being so doggone poor. And he's very convincing, though. So 2-3 months later, here I am. I've got a flat with 5 other dudes in Coogee, right? And I'm a student at UNSW where we did the study abroad, right? And I'm almost done with my degree. I don't know what I was doing here, but he talked me into it, right? And so I went to a couple classes here at UNSW. So it looks familiar, but it's changed a lot since I was last here. And we're probably here 7 or 8 days. And my brother's like, oh, dude, I gotta go. I gotta go back home. I was like, you brought me down here, and now you're gonna leave? 7 days in, he's gone. So he left. And I was like, well, I could stay here for a little bit, finish out, learn some things. And so I had met this young lady a couple of days prior, right? And so I think I must have been talking to her, and she's like, well, you're only in Australia for like a couple months. You should go see the country. Why do you want to go sit in boring classes and learn, and do all this other stuff, right? And so that's what I did. I actually went to I think 2 classes, and then I've driven from Cairns to Adelaide twice. You can imagine that distance. And for 6 or 7 months, I just got a chance to go around Australia and see it. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. It turned out to be right. The thing is, I never kind of came back to ANU and paid my debts, I guess. So it brings it full circle, right? No, but and so I haven't been to UNSW since then. I was at, some of you know that I spent 4 years in Canberra at the ANU studying economics. But I never made it back to UNSW. So it's great to be here, and I really do want to thank you for the opportunity to be back at UNSW. And I was hoping you would have left right now, so you're not waiting for me with a bill in my hand. So, all right, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. So I did want to kind of just make the link with UNSW, and of course being back in Australia. Got a clicker here. Right here. Sorry. You know what?
Can you turn it down?
You know? Sorry. So what I want to talk about is progress in economic measurement, and I'll talk about it at BEA, which is the place that I, of course, know best. But I like to I'll take a general approach. I'll talk a little bit about how I think it's been, assessed, and I'll try to define what I mean by progress, which is I think the hardest thing maybe in all of this, right? But I want to start. I'll give you another quick story with has anyone read this book by Ben Friedman? I hadn't either till recently. Again, another tangential story. I guess I'm known for that. But I've got a son. I've got 3 sons, and my youngest son is at that age where he really likes nice shoes and clothes and all that stuff, right? And so that stuff's expensive. So I don't normally, take him to malls and stores to get it. We go to these. There's a thrift store, secondhand store by our house. And so a couple months ago now, he just broke me down, harassed me, and we wound up going to that store, right? And he's walking around trying on shoes, trying on pants. I went to the book section, and this book was in that section, right? And it just totally random. I had never, I'd never seen this or anything like that. It's $3, by the way. I picked it up for him. So I get this book, and I start reading it, and I just found it really powerful, the argument that Friedman makes in this book. And what he's basically saying is that broad-based economic growth is good for the moral fabric of a society. He's got all kinds of arguments and data in there that he's making that case, though. We always hear about the reverse. And that goes back to antiquity, right? That a moral society, will have broad-based economic growth or will be wealthy. You can go back to Aristotle and get echoes of that. But I had not seen something, that twisted it around with so much. He's got a lot of evidence in here too that he's backing it up with, and he's had a more recent book that I just started reading on kind of the religious underpinnings. of some of this. But anyways, and so then it got me thinking. My business is economic statistics, economic measurement, and I asked myself, like, he's talking about how economic growth, progress in the economy, if you like, helps the moral fabric of a society. But what does economic measurement mean? What does progress in economic measurement lead to? You ever thought about that? I mean, we all kind of think about, I think, like we want to do better statistics because it'll help decision makers or policy makers. We want to do X or Y because we think it'll make something better. But I really have never systematically thought about, what does progress in what the folks that work in my organization, when we do something better, what does that actually lead to? And so that's why I wanted to frame today with that, because I think we've got a lot to talk about as a community in terms of progress and measurement for a very long time, and I'll touch on some of that. So that's kind of the background for how I got to the framing that I got. I think it's important because I know not everyone in here knows my organization, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, who we are, what we do. So I think I'll introduce some of you to that, talk a little bit about that. I also want to give you context for some of the quote unquote progress that I'm going to talk about later. So I'm going to try to keep you awake, but there's some history in here, on some of the products that we at BEA have been doing for a very long time. And I think it's important when I tell you later that, hey, we're going to accelerate the personal income release by 1 day, you're like, well, who cares? 1 day. But when you see that it started in 1938 and we've been doing it for a long time like that, that's, you'll see that it's really important to have that context to understand why those quality improvements matter. So that's why I'm going through all this for you. All right, so who we are. So most of you know who we are, but the U.S. statistical system is a little bit different than most countries. There's a few like us, but we have what we call a decentralized system. And what the ABS does, or StatScan does, or an ONS really does, we have 13 so-called principal stat agencies that do. And so BEA, Bureau of Economic Analysis, is one of them. But there's the others that, you see in the news here and there, like the U.S. Census Bureau, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and so on and so forth. BEA is one of the bigger ones, but so we're part of that system, and economic statistics is what we focus on, particularly macroeconomic statistics is what we do, right? And so the headliners that we have, U.S. GDP, that we have a joke at BEA that GDP pays the bills. So GDP is kind of the headliner, but we also, we jointly with the census do the U.S. trade balance, which has been a lot more important in the last year or so. And then inflation, actually, the PCE price index, which many of you know, which we released last Friday, the monthly PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, is probably our most popular product because it's the Federal Reserve's preferred measure for at least consumer inflation. They look at it a lot. So that's the kind of those are the headliners. But we've got, I want to say, between 4 and 5 million unique series that we produce every year. So there's that's 3 of them. So but there's a lot more. Where that comes from, and to give you a sense of the scope of what we're dealing with, and I don't know what it's like for anyone else, but on an order of magnitude, roughly speaking, when we have a GDP release or a personal income release, we can expect in the first few minutes between 500,000 and 1 million hits on our news. That's like roughly the magnitude of what we're looking at, and we're in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 million table downloads for some of those things a month. So that, it's not crazy numbers, but it is, there's a lot of interest in these numbers. Right, so a little bit of history. I mean, there's a lot going on here, but I want to make 2 points on this. One that I like to share with our staff, which I don't know, many of us don't appreciate, is that the VA's history goes back to 1820. Somebody accused me of making this up, by the way, and I did not make it up. This is from the U.S. National Archives that I got it, and so 1820. I think a lot of people are surprised when they hear that. We're in kind of our current incarnation since about 1972, so it hasn't been that long. But 1820, and our roots are actually in international trade. It's not national income accounts. It's international trade. So that's the 2 big takeaways from here. Is we kind of go back a ways. But it really did start in trade, which is why, and Paul's remarked on this a couple times, is like for us, the longest running continuous product that we have is the United States balance of payments. And I think that surprises a lot of people. So that came out first in 1923, for the year 1922. The U.S. balance of payments. So this is our longest running continuous product. I love this because I think I got a link in there to it. Herbert Hoover, who eventually became president of the United States, wrote the foreword to this because he was the Secretary of Commerce at the time. And he was, when I learned more about kind of the U.S. economic statistics infrastructure, Hoover was critical in creating a lot of the things that we have today, whether it was at BEA or the U.S. Census Bureau. He was very big. So one thing I'll mention here, because I'll come back and talk about it later, is that you've got the balance of payments, the flows, stocks, the international investment position. We published on again and off again with this, but we took it out in 1954. And since 1954, they've been on two separate streams. So the flows and stocks are separate. We're going to bring them back together this year, which is one of the quality improvements I think that we're making. There. So national income. This is the one that I think most people are familiar with. I'll tell you the quick story. In 1934, we published our first estimates of national income. Simon Kuznets, of course, was the one that led that effort at the Department of Commerce. He was on, I think you would call it here, secondment from the National Bureau of Economic Research over to Commerce. He came in, did the work, and then he left. But what sometimes not appreciated is he left an infrastructure of individuals that stayed there, and then kind of built the program out. And so, Diane Boyle's book, she talks about this. You'll see a name, Martin Gilbert is in there. Some of you are familiar with that name. He was a protege of Kuznets. Robert Nathan's another one. These were people that helped develop the U.S. National Implement Product Account. So those came out. Those came out in 34, and then in 42, GMP comes out to help support war planning. That's why you get the gross, of course. And then so on and so forth. And we were a little bit late in adopting GDP as our featured measure, and that was 1991 when we did that. Again, I want to come back to this later on. Personal income. So this is one of the coolest stories, I think, because a lot of times you hear personal income and you're not quite sure what it is. But it's, and so here's where it came from. And I think in 1936 or 35, something like that, we started in the U.S., the administration of President Roosevelt passed the Social Security Act, which included unemployment insurance for the first time. And they wanted a way to gauge the impact of the unemployment insurance payments on individuals in the economy. Personal income was BEA's response to that. So that's a monthly measure, and that's why it's got transfers in it. If you look, it has transfer payments in there. And that's the reason for it, is because the purpose of it was to actually help with that, and it's still very popular. This is an indicator which, nominal personal income still moves, at least U.S. financial markets, when it's published every month. People are really looking to see what's in there. And then, we've had some variants of it. I'll mention distribution because I'm sure that'll come up later. We've had like an on again, off again relationship with the distribution of income. We started in 53, it went away, came back, went away. It's back now, and I hope for good. In 2024, it became an official statistic again. For the first time since the 50s, and that's the distributed personal income. And then finally, and this is a hobby horse of mine, subnational, what we call our regional statistics. I think these have been appreciated or underused for a very long time. And one of the things I'll come back to at the end is I really believe that we as a community need to put more focus on subnational statistics. If I go out and talk to audiences like this, which I do all the time, there's two things that they always want. They want us to be faster. Everyone knows this. They get it faster, right? And they want what's the GDP in my city or what's the GDP in my house? They want all that stuff, right? Those are the two things they're always. So the granularity piece, which I'll come back to, right? So, all right. So that's kind of the history of some of our products. Again, I'm coming back to that to tell you why I went through it. But now I want to just move sideways a little bit and think about this idea of assessing progress. How do you do that? When you think about, we've made improvements, we've gotten better at economic measurement. How do we think about that? What's the right way to do that? I don't know what the right way to do that is, but I think we've done a decent job as a community, right? So I'm not an economic measurement person. That's not, I cut my teeth in economics, at least in macroeconomic modeling. And so I had to learn a lot on the job, and I went back to a lot of the seminal work in the field to understand kind of what's happened over time, and you know, and the progress we've made. And what I found is that we've done a pretty good job. You know, it's pretty good, especially when you think about things like GDP, and that, and now, you know, the well-being stuff, I think, is very well documented now. So you can see some of the progress, right? So I'll make 2 points on this. One is, I think that is not true for other, you know, for other statistics. I just talked about subnational. I don't know that, you know, that we've done much in terms of assessing the progress that we have in subnational economic statistics. And I haven't seen anything actually around that. One of the things that, you know, we've tried to do, and I think in 2027, the U.S. Conference on Research and Income and Wealth, which is part of the National Bureau of Economic Research. I know some of you have sat on it for a very long time. I know it. They're having one of the conferences they have is going to be focused on subnational statistics, which I'm very happy about. So there'll be a volume out of there that talks about some of the things that are going on in this area, which I think is got a lot of opportunity. Yeah, so I think there's areas that we haven't focused on. The other thing is when at least when I read a lot of these things, the focus of the assessment, and I don't call it assessment a lot, is really on the comprehensiveness and the theoretical consistency, which makes sense if you think about it. It's how comprehensive does it fit together, right? And so I think that's fine. I mean, we need that, right? But what I want to argue too is that there's other aspects of data quality we should be using in assessing progress. So comprehensiveness is important, consistency is important, but it's not everything. Certainly, you know, when I sit in front of audiences and if I talk about comprehensiveness, they're like, "Can you get it to me faster?" That's what I want, right? And that's what they're focused on, right? And so I think we've done a decent job in certain areas, but there's a lot I think we could do. We could do more, is what I'll say. And so, all right. So now I'm going to try to transition a little bit into BEA specifically. Right? I've been pretty general. What about BEA? And so over the years, we've had a lot of assessments. So many of you have been part of those assessments. So thank you, you know, for sitting through a lot of that stuff. And we've had formal review committees in the Congress. We've had all kinds of stuff over the years. I just listed a few, and they've been mainly focused on the National Income and Products Account, GDP. But there's been, you know, a couple on the balance payments as well, or the international transactions, right? But not as much recently. And then we've also in-house done a lot in terms of review articles by some of the people in this room, and Survey of Current Business, and in other journals. By the way, Survey of Current Business is currently BEA's kind of in-house journal. It's our flagship where we call it our journal of record. Herbert Hoover is responsible for starting that in 1921 and started at the U.S. Census Bureau. It was Herbert Hoover and Edwin Gay, Wesley Mitchell. So probably you've heard of Mitchell. You've probably heard of Hoover. Edwin Gay was the first head of the NBER. So those are the three people that were responsible for starting the Survey of Current Business as the Census Bureau. Came to be in 1930. And so we've maintained that ever since. So it's a lot of my predecessors were George Jowsey, Carol Carson. Many of you either knew them or know them. Steve Landefeld have published in there, and many others, right? And then, of course, many of you, we've had articles from external researchers that look at our different statistics and take an assessment of them if we like. Including, you know, Simon, of course, did it, Ruggles and Dale, or what I'm sure you've done it. You know, so like we've had many people who have done that. So that's kind of the way we've assessed it. And again, I think it's been pretty good. There's kind of a microscope on some of the things we do for good reason, because they're very important statistics. So here's where, you know, I want to transition a bit and talk about data quality. So I think that middle area there, objectivity. So by the way, this is a framework that I use in my head. It's for me, the most useful framework to assess data quality that I've ever seen. It's from the U.S. Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology. I'm going to make a joke that again, when you have a federal committee on anything, it's how useful is the output going to be? But this is really useful. But this is I found very useful. And so, but my argument is basically that we have focused in our community right here. It's been about coherence, you know, accuracy, of course, but it's been about objective. And what I think we need to broaden out and think about all of the domains, if you like, particularly all the dimensions in here. And this is what I hear from users about all the time, is utility. And so I'm going to come back to you later and say, you know, where can we use your help? It's on the left. and from VA's perspective, from my perspective, it's on the left, right? So this is the framework I'll use to assess the progress that I'm going to talk about now, and that's where I'll go next, right? So, what does recent economic measurement progress look like in that frame? And I'm going to start with the utility. I'll start on the left, and I'll start with timeliness. And we're calling 2026 at VEA. I like these kind of catchy slogans. We're calling it the year of acceleration. So we're trying to get faster in everything we do. So it's a year of acceleration, and we've got a lot of exciting accelerations coming up. And some of these, the dates might be, you might have heard we had a partial government shutdown, so there's a little bit, this might push to the right a little bit, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. It depends in some sense on the data providers too, the source data we get, and when we're able to get it. So these three, for me, are like, I am thrilled with these accelerations. So the first is personal income and outlays. Traditionally, and this is why the history matters, we release GDP on Thursday, and personal income comes out on Friday. And so that's the way we've done it for a very long time. And starting this year, we're going to release GDP, personal income. The personal income release includes the PCE price index. So it's like Wall Street's favorite report that we produce. They're both going to come out same day, same time. And that, and I know a lot of people are like, what's the big deal? It's only 24 hours. It is a huge deal. And if I talk to Wall Street economists, one of the first questions they always ask me is, why do you wait a day to release personal income? They're really asking about the PCE price index. Why do you wait a day? And there's good reasons we did it, but we were able to make some improvements in our processes and our IT systems. We're ready to go to release this. The challenge I have right now is I'm a little bit concerned about the demand. So we have to really do some testing, and we have done testing. We're confident, but so that's why. It's going to happen, but we just make sure we got to make our systems can handle the load that we get. Like when you've got the advanced estimate of GDP plus a PCE price index, and maybe you're right before a Federal Reserve meeting, you're going to get a lot of people that are interested in this. So we want to make sure that everyone who needs the data can get it. So that's the only holdup right now is testing our IT system. I mentioned number two, the IIPs, the international investment position. We're going to bring that back in with what we call the international transactions accounts, the balance of payments. And so we're going to be finally, for one thing, at least in line with international standards, where we have a quarterly release of the balance of payments that includes stocks and flows, which that means we're going to have to accelerate the IIPs. Great. And I think that's going to make it a much more useful product for people so they can see everything at once. And then the final thing, again, a lot of people, I tell them this and they're kind of like, but for me, I'm thrilled. And this has been a 10-year project for us. Is that we're going to accelerate GDP by state, the subnational statistics by a day. But I'm sorry to give you all these details, but they matter for why this is important. Now, we have three cracks at GDP. The advanced estimate, 30 days after the end of a quarter. That's usually our most popular one. The second estimate, and that is only GDP by expenditures. The second estimate, 60 days roughly after the end of a quarter, that includes GDP by expenditures, but now we're going to give you GDP on the income side, what we call gross domestic income. We're also going to give you corporate profits, which is another important economic indicator, at least on Wall Street. And then 90 days after, what we call our third estimate, you get GDP by expenditure, GDP by income, and now we're going to give you GDP, our variant GDP on the production side, we call it GDP by industry. So you get all three of those. And of course, you're getting updates to data and all this and whatnot. So you get three cracks at it. And then normally in that third estimate, that comes out Thursday at 8:30. Friday at 8:30 is personal income, like I told you. And Friday at 10 is GDP by state. And I always looked at it and I was like, why is GDP by state by itself? Like, why, it's like the orphan. Like, why's it got to be over here by itself? Why isn't it with the rest of the GDPs? It's just important. And so this has been actually part of all these, the hardest is getting our processes right. Because we do at the state level, we do a top-down approach to GDP. So the national numbers feed down in the state. So the timing is really tight. And so this has been a negotiation with our team, to say the least. All those of you who run like production shops know what I mean. It's been very much a negotiation. But we think in March, again, depends on the data provider, if they're able to get it. So it'll either be March or June, because that's the third estimate. You're going to get one release that gives you GDP by expenditures, income, product, and state, which It's been 10 years, it's taken us a long time to get here, but that's a huge, to me, that's a huge improvement for our users because they get it all. And so that's the acceleration of GDP by state, right? We've got more accelerations. I won't go into much detail here. I just call home and doing. Got about 10 minutes. I want to give. Yeah, I mean nobody's falling asleep yet, so we're good. We're good so far, right? So on the survey side, we do some surveys, and we're responsible for the U.S. Investment survey, so the foreign direct investment. And the U.S. direct investment abroad is what we do, plus some work on multinationals, which again has been very relevant these last 10 years. People, I think it goes in cycles, the interest people have in this. And the last 10 years have been a time when people have been really interested in direct investment. So we're going to try to accelerate some of those, particularly, and this is based on stakeholder demand, the new foreign direct investment in the United States. There's a real policy interest in that, and there has been, again, for 5-6 years. So we want to accelerate some of those. Trading value added, or TIVA, that's something that at least a few of you I know are very interested in, and so we're going to accelerate. So right now we've got 2023 statistics. When I tell policymakers, "Oh, I've got 2023 statistics, and we're going to 2026," you can imagine the reaction that I get from them. Right, so we're working on it. So in April, I think it'll still be April. It'll be 24, and then we're going to get to where we want to be, which is toward the end of the year. We're going to get it to 2025, and so we made some upgrades, and so we think we can get on about a year delay with the TIVA statistics, which is I think about where we want to be. The third one here is generating a lot of interest right now within the Department of Commerce, which is we think we can do monthly. I call it business investment, but it's really private fixed investment. If you look at the expenditure side of the GDP, C plus I plus G plus NX. We already do C monthly. We already do NX monthly. Investment is kind of the big one that people really get G monthly. They really want investment, right? So that's a big one. I say aspirational because I would love to, but it's tough. I mean, in monthly inventories, there's no joke being able to do that, and so it's going to take a lot of testing and work on this, right? And then the gross output, we got. People are getting more interested in our industry statistics, so can we accelerate those from the third in bits and pieces? All right, so that's the timeliness, the year of acceleration. But I told you about granularity. I'm still in that left box on the domain of utility, and so these are the two things that I hear about. So that's timeliness, and then we've had some granularity increases. We've been able to do better with our trade statistics, annual trade statistics. Then we got almost like 220 countries or something now that we can do. We added about 150 this past year, which is, a lot of people have been asking for that. So of all the things that I've talked about, the number one request that I get is quarterly consumer spending by state. That's like, I've talked to so many people, and I've been shocked. This is why it's always useful to go out and talk to actual users. Is like, I always say at the end, I was like, I won't ask you guys, but I was like, what's your wish list, What do you want? And quarterly consumer spending by state is like the number one request I've gotten. And a lot of it's come, if you're familiar with the U.S. Federal Reserve, there's regional reserve banks. When I'm at the Federal Reserve banks talking to them, this is really on their minds. That's a group that really wants this. They also want the trading services by state. I mean, you see a subnational theme here, but a lot of this is just based on our users' demand. This is really what they want, and these are hard things to do, as many of us know. So when we're looking for help, we're looking for research. There's stuff like this is where we could really use. How do we take that aggregate information and make it more granular for folks, while still protecting privacy? And then our GDP by state statistics are not. We don't do it by the expenditure approach to GDP. We do it by income, and so we don't have C plus I plus G plus NX for states. So we want to do that for states. And I think we're getting close to actually releasing a working paper on PFI by state. Which again, you can imagine if you're a governor or something like that, that's really valuable to you. Government expenditure, so that just continues. Let me just say, I think I'm becoming more and more confident that we can do something on AI. I think we can do a satellite account on AI. I shouldn't have said that before, but I'm becoming more confident. I don't know if my team's that's right. But yeah, so there's a lot of interest in this everywhere. But so we think we may be able to find something. This one's harder, man. The crypto stuff that is really hard for us. And so we're still conceptualizing what would that look like. And there's a lot. Our secretary in particular has a lot of interest in this, and so there's certainly a policy need for us to do something. So we're looking into it and seeing what we can do. Again, we start our research. And I'm talking about outside the standard stuff, but like when we want to know what's the size of the crypto economy, whatever that means. How are you going to define that? Like what does that mean? And that's the kind of questions we get from people. Accuracy, we tend to do, and now I'm in the middle box, right? If you go back to the data quality framework, I'm in the middle box. But we do, like many of you do, every year or two we'll release what we call reliability studies on GDP and components. We're doing on ITAs, and this year we'll have something on the regional accounts. It's been really helpful for us as we've been doing this on the regional accounts. What you can see is when you look at revisions, there's certain states that stand out. And they have higher revisions than others. We haven't published anything yet, but it's really interesting when you look at it, and what you find is it's the more capital intensive states. And the reason for that is we have good data on wages, but we don't have great data on the capital side. So like just going through the process and putting it together has already said, all right, we need to find new data on these states for these certain things. And that whole process is really useful for us to be able to do something like that. So that's not out yet, but it'll be out hopefully this year. And then again, in the middle box, we got to make sure everything fits together. And I just brought some of these things together because for our users, I mean, it does matter, right? And everyone knows it matters that we're comprehensive, right? And that everything is theoretically consistent. One thing that I'm particularly excited about is that we've got some experimental statistics. Dennis Fixler, his team, many of you know him. Got something on human capital. It's another thing where we've had kind of an on-again, off-again relationship with human capital, estimates. And I know some of you in here do it, and so it's something I'm excited about because I'm glad we're on again with this session. All right, so let me finish out then with a few thoughts. I've already given you kind of where I think we need to go, but I really believe, and this is based on my experience with users, we need to focus more on timeliness. That's if you take away one thing from me, is like we got to focus more on timeliness because that's what everybody wants. They want it faster. And so like that's what we have to do. And so we've taken some steps towards doing that, towards accelerating some of our products, but speed is key. My son's like, you just want people to go faster because you're so slow. Now maybe that's the case, but I want to go faster, right? So we're gonna try, right? And the granularity piece is really important too. But I just give you the framework because this is in my head when I'm thinking about it. We need to focus on maybe putting more of an emphasis on a different dimension of data quality, if you like, than traditionally you might have when we're assessing progress. That's kind of my key takeaway. And then, so when I say that, one of the response always is, well, there's a trade-off between accuracy and time limits. Maybe, sometimes. I think, in my head, this is the framework I use when I'm thinking about accuracy versus timeliness. Is, those of you who studied economics, production possibilities frontier, I think if you ask yourself, are we on the production possibilities frontier for every single statistic that we produce? Sure. Right? So for me, I think a lot of times we're starting here. At that start, we got to get out. First thing we got to do is get to the production possibilities frontier, and I think a lot of that is in my view, is process based. It's about process. We got to improve our process. And you tell it to staff, and their eyes glaze over. But it's true, right? Like you have to improve your processes. Once you get on that PPF, traditionally we talk about technology improvements, right? And I think that's right. I think IT modernization is critical to shifting that frontier out. Another thing that you don't think about much when you talk about shifting out this production possibilities frontier is, leadership, culture, organizational culture. Like the things that are hard to measure can shift that out. It's not just about IT. People trust you. There's a lot been written recently about trust, right? The speed of trust. The company's got that great book about just how trust can help. Anyone ever read that? My favorite book on leadership is James Kern, The Legacy on the All Blacks. Anyone read that? Man, it is the best book. But he talks about, he talks about, in there, he's got a chapter, he takes some excerpts about integrity. And the importance of integrity as an input to the production function. I had never, in a book about rugby leadership, he's talking about the production function and integrity. It was kind of cool when I saw that, but it resonated with me. It's like there's intangibles that we don't necessarily know about that can shift this out. All right, so I went way off topic. So the whole point of this, right, is that I do think we can improve timeliness without sacrificing accuracy. And that's just my conceptual way to think about it. So let's bring it home. So that's it. So I started with the question, though, which I didn't answer. I really focused on progress. I didn't answer the question I started with, was what does progress in economic measurement lead to? And I think somebody on my team going through some historical documents, and Simon wrote this in the 40s, and it really resonated with me when I read this. And I had to read it a couple of times because the language is a little bit old school, I guess is the way I would describe it. But basically the argument he's made, what he's saying is we want economic measurement to get better. We want to do better, our jobs better, because it helps people solve problems and makes their lives better. I think that's kind of cool. So I mean, to me, that's what it leads to, and he kind of lays it out here. I'll end it there. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Vipin, for a very inspiring talk. We actually do have some time for questions, comments, objections. If you want to come in, I would ask you to use the microphone. Our colleagues here are ready to hand them out. And maybe also introduce yourselves so you get a better context for the question comes from. So the floor is open. Who wants to come in? Yes, please.
Thanks very much, Dr. Arora. That's really exciting. I was just wondering, do you guys have? Oh, sorry. Catherine DeFontenay from the Productivity Commission. I was just wondering, does the BEA have plans to measure whether there is any actual macroeconomic impact of delivering these statistics in a more timely fashion? Because it is expensive to be more timely. Are there ways that you could figure out whether it is having an impact?
I didn't, but now I will. I'll figure something out. So I appreciate the question. No, we had. That's a great idea. So, what is the impact, whether it's macroeconomic or something else, right? Absolutely. No, we hadn't, but thank you for that.
There was a colleague up here, and then Rachel.
Hi, this is Timmy from Bureau of Communications and Regional Research. So I realize, there's a slide you will have at the beginning and also by the end is something you talk about the objectivity. So my question is, because BEA produced certain amount of publications relating to semantic and extended accounts, which is called selected accounts. For some data kind selected topics, it's quite difficult to get objectivity. For example, when people talk about creativity, actually there's no internationally agreed standard definition for defining that, same as even like digitalization or care support economy, etc. So my question is how when you come to this kind of topic, how you guys achieve the objectivity and make it more reliable?
Yeah, that's a tough question right there. Oh, yeah, that's not an easy one. So satellite accounts, I think most people are familiar, but the way I think about satellite accounts is, we've got our normal national accounts, or you can talk about the regionals. There's certain aggregates you can pull out of those. Think of roles in a table. But a satellite account allows you, in some sense, I'm thinking about what we call a thematic satellite account, which is what you mentioned, is to kind of take a different perspective out of it. So pull out something that may not be easy to pull out of the national accounts. In our case, arts and cultural recreation is a good example. Like there's nowhere you can go in the national income or products account and see a line for arts and culture. But we have a so-called satellite account that estimates the size of the arts and culture economy in the United States, jobs associated with it, et cetera, right? And so the question really is, well, how do you, what I heard you say is, how do you know you got the definition of arts and culture right? We don't. I mean, so yeah, we have a. So we used to do a lot more of these, and we can talk about this a little bit if you want. We've been moving away from thematic satellite accounts because of resource constraints, frankly, and so we're focused on core statistics. But one of the things when we're putting together one of these satellite accounts is the hardest part in a lot of sense is negotiating, and it is a negotiation with all kinds of stakeholders. What's the definition of what you're measuring? That may be true for a lot of things, right? But like, how do you, what's in arts and what's not? And so what we tend to do is we tend to have a lot of stakeholder consultation, and not just with the people that are asking us to do it, but with, associations, that are related to this industry. And then we come up with a working definition based on that. A lot of times we'll host workshops like this, get at the definition. And so we really don't have that's the best that we can do. I think it's a pretty good approach, and it's worked in, probably the 10 thematic satellite counts or whatever we do. But it's not there's not a definition. That's what I worry about with the AI, right? If you're gonna do an AI satellite account, how are you gonna define AI? So we've been thinking about, go ahead, please.
So this is my second question. Basically, what the BA published, the digital economy
We want to hear the recording.
and the AI discussion paper regarding how to measure that. Those things is quite intangible. Currently, many countries follow the similar scope and definition for digital economy and like in Australia call it digital activity. But when you guys really looking at what the goods and services classifications in the national accounts, actually it's all tangible. So that's why large amount of digital economy came from the digital enabling infrastructure, because like cables, mobiles, computers, those things, that's how you convert to those intangibles to tangibles. And the same as AI. So my question is is BA having any future plan to how to increase the visibility and improve the measurement in terms of this? And if that's the plan, through what way? Because the reason people need a semantic account is because currently the current classifications within the national accounts is not good enough. That's literally because that's why this kind of accounts came from. So from the BA's perspective, whether you guys are going to through the purely measurement perspective to improve the visibility, or you guys trying to improve the classifications to increase the visibility?
So the short answer is no. And because we're not going to do as many as we did. So, and I don't know how many will be left when we're through, in terms of the resource restrictions that, the constraints that we have now. So we don't plan to do that. But what I can say is historically what we have done is we have every year tried to update and improve the definitions. The arts and culture is a good example. I think that started in 2013 or 2014. And every year we look back and say, are these still the industries? We have consultation. But that's really the best we can do. And then we try to, the users of this data are less interested in the definition than, is it 2.3% this year? Is it 2.5% this year? And that's really what they're focused on. For the satellite accounts, right? Because they want to be able to take that number, as you know, and use it for something else, right? Because which is great. Everyone has their uses for numbers, and so we don't. The methodology behind a lot of this stuff isn't widely read. That's an understatement, I would say, but we do try to go back and improve it every year. I'm sorry. The direct answer to your question is no. We don't plan on that, but we do make improvements every year. We just don't highlight them necessarily.
So Richard is next. Then Mervyn, then Andre.
Thank you, Richard Hayes, ONS. Thinking about the core part of your talk and evaluating the progress you made in improving quality, it struck me the model you were using was very much sort of assessment, getting experts to review and write papers. ONS-ESCoE, we've periodically looked at how we can consult with users and try to gain their feedback on their evaluation of our performance, which has often been quite difficult to get that information effectively. If you're trying to get something like a willingness to pay, what people hear is you're asking no willingness to pay, and turn that into a real pound sign and a price, and you get very low answers coming back. But with your focus on utility, are you thinking about how you try and get that information out of users?
No, I mean, that's where my focus on utility came from. So it's almost like, I step back and I think the reason I'm so focused, because remember, I come to this with maybe not a lot of history. And so the feedback that I get from people is, can you make it faster? So in some ways, yeah, that's where my focus is granularity and utility, and timeliness because of user feedback. But in a formal way, one of the things we're starting to do now that might get at this a little bit is, as many of you do, as many of us do, we get, thousands and thousands of emails and requests, hey, and ask, whether it's the press or users, and we're using some AI to kind of get the key, what are the key things that people are asking about. And I think that's going to be a very valuable tool. So it's in development, but we've made some progress on it. I think that's going to be valuable too, to get more formally at what you're saying. I haven't done anything formal with it, but I think that's going to be a very helpful way to do that. So, yes and no, I guess.
Perfect.
Erwin Dewart, University of New South Wales. Income by state, GDP by state, very interesting. But how are you going to get the information to implement it? On the GDP stuff, I mean, probably thinking production downstairs.
Yeah.
But then, there's companies that are not only having transactions across states, across countries. So how do you sort that part out? How do you get the deflators for the gross output, for the intermediate inputs? Then we come to, labor, well, good information there. But then on capital, user costs, we don't have, really information on capital stocks by state.
Yeah.
Then land, big, huge missing input. Okay, so that's my problem. There's the information. And then on the income side, presumably we're going to do this from a household perspective. But households hold stocks around the world. And then to try to trace what the implicit income is, from your stock holdings abroad and through your various accounts, how do you do that? So that's my questions.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So I'm going to start GDP by expenditure because I think that's the one, that's the one that we most focused on. And ultimately, what we want to get to is, and I know Canada has this, maybe others do, supply use tables by state. That that's where we're going to ultimately, right? That's the goal. We don't have nearly enough the data. So what we've got right now is, our team has basically filled out a hypothetical supply use table and said, here's the big gaps that we have. And so that's kind of where we're starting in terms of building towards state level, whatever these accounts, right? And so, what I've told them, and that's why these are going to be experimental for a very long time, is we have to first go through the process of identifying, and you of course know a lot of these gaps, what the gaps are, and then the way that it'll work in the U.S. is I'm going to go hand in hand to my friends at the Census Bureau and say, hey, can you help me fill some of these gaps? And if there's enough interest from people, then I think we'll be able to do it. And I'm very confident there's enough governors out there that want this kind of stuff, that there's going to be interest. The question will be, will there be resources behind it? And that's always a hard thing for all of us, right? To get that resourcing. But so I guess for what you hear me say, I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon, but I think it's an iterative process where we have to first identify what the big gaps are. The capital stock one and the deflators are the two that I think are that we just I don't know. I don't know. The deflators are the ones that I was like, we are going to be able to do something like this. I really don't know, but that's why groups like this exist, right? So we're going to ask for help, and so how can we do these things? And so that that didn't directly answer your question, but I think it's got to be iterative, and we've got to have the goal in mind. Otherwise, we're just never going to get there. But we have to put something. I really believe in momentum as a strategy, but we have to put something out there and say, look, this is experimental. we don't think this is right, but we need your feedback and support to get it right. And so once it's out there, now you start to get demand for it. And I think that's when we can have the conversation with the governor, staff, or whoever it is about, yeah, this is something we need, need to do. Right. But then there's all of these have those exact issues. On the income side, I think we're a little better. We do have access, even with far delayed, tax records. So we do get some limited tax information for certain, we can get certain cuts of that tax information, not at the individual level, but I think we can get some aggregates that might be useful. So I think there's some hope there as well.
Always next.
Thanks, Vipin. That was an excellent presentation. I agree with you 100% on your approach to the utility. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at quality. I'm always following the same bigger, better, faster, cheaper. That's all I ever hear from stakeholders as well. So if we think about progress on economic measurement, we as national accountants and statisticians always seem to sort of talk about changes as improvements. So we're making a change through this method, it's an improvement. We're doing this, it's an improvement. But that said, so we understand that what we're doing is better probably than what we were doing in the past, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. But I think users struggle with that. Another thing that users tell us is that they hate revisions. And for modelers, time series are super important. So I just wondered, sort of in the context of your presentation and everything that you said, what is your view and what is the DEA approach on that? Sort of navigating that trade-off?
Yeah, by the way, I'll just say this, I'm in a very hungry, but like, I always find Stats Canada to be the ace in the other room, so when I'm getting questions from him, it's a little bit hilarious. We have to do everything really well, and I think for us, and so the approach to handling users, Andre, you're asking about, or the approach to the revisions?
Your approach with the users regarding them.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. So the way we talk about revisions, what we used to call revisions, now we call them updates. That's my kind of the way that we, at least I conceptualize it, is that this is the way you're going to be able to balance accuracy and timeliness for things like GDP. You don't get an advance estimate 30 days after a quarter unless you're able to make some imputations or basically use a very scientific approach to filling in some data gaps that have come later. So we talk about updates. That's really the way that we do it, and we talk about it's funny you mention that because we've been having a lot of these conversations lately about talking to different people about some people still refer to what we might call revisions, but really how they're updates are getting better data. And so you want better data, but you also want it fast. So this process of updating allows you to do it quickly. Incidentally, one thing that I've been kind of talking to people about is that if you look at U.S. GDP, and I'm talking about expenditure side U.S. GDP now, over time, the average revision between the advanced estimate and the third estimate that I talked about has been cut in less than a half over the last 10 years. And a lot of that has to do with our partners at the U.S. Census Bureau producing what are called advanced economic indicators, where they give us an early look. They give the public the same look, but the whole impetus of that was to provide us at DEA with better information earlier for the advanced estimate. And so we basically seen half revisions. So it's been a pretty big success story, that kind of collaboration within the U.S. government.
If I could, you were next, please. Yeah. Just adding that very often updates are interpreted as errors by the press.
Yeah.
So dealing with that is not a difficult task. But please,
Yes, thank you. Michael Plato from the Business Council of Australia. So I wanted to ask, I think you had quite a number of partner organisations, even a decentralised model, but you've got all of you, maybe mentioned census bureau several times. would you be able to tell us about how that works in practice? How the information flows between, like you have sort of protocols for sharing information. It sounds like the Census Bureau, there is data which is actually required for the GDP. That's just one example. I assume the labour statistics feed into GDP and other numbers. So could you tell us how that works in practice, and does it work?
Yeah.
I assume it does, but how does it work in practice? I also, just a completely unrelated question, could you tell us about the use of AI in what you do? How much are you using AI? What are your plans on AI? Not AI in the economy, but the AI in the development of statistics. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the first one, I think it works pretty well. So just to give you a sense, we're taking a VA to put together the different accounts that we have. About 300 different organizations feed us information. And so some provide us 10 data sources, some provide us, so we're dealing with everyone who produces these things is dealing with a lot of data inputs, but it's about 300 different organizations, about a third from the private sector, about a third state and local governments, pension funds and so on, and a third from within the US federal government. That's what we're dealing with when we're talking about bringing these inputs. And so some of it is pretty straightforward. When they publish it on their website, we pull it in, and it's not a hard thing. Some of it all of it, I think, is publicly available information, but some of it is really about people. I mean, it goes back to people, right? It's about relationships, and so we're very cognizant and very focused on having relationships at the right places in the right organizations. So some data sources are more important than others, and our most important data comes from the U.S. Census Bureau, from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, from the IRS, what they call statistics of income. Those are three probably the most important data sources. And then the National Science Foundation with the R&D information that we're getting. And so we're very cognizant of those relationships. And so I spend a lot of time, I meet with the leaders of those organizations probably quarterly, and we talk about some of the challenges that we have. But at a staff level, that's been the most important thing. Can I just say, I really appreciate your question, because that wasn't always the case. And so and I wasn't here at VA for this, but 15 years ago, the VA census relationship wasn't nearly as close as it was. It wasn't bad, it just was more of an arm's reach. And now, we're like this, and so that's really important. It doesn't mean that, there's not things that I want them to do that they don't do, or the reverse, right? But like, it's, everyone's under different constraints, right? So that's kind of how that works within the federal government. Your question was about the federal government, right? States are harder, man, because every state is different. And those of you who have liaison offices know this. Every state, every province is different, and that's a whole nother conversation, right? And then with the private sector, that can be tricky too, because that stuff goes away, as we all know. And so, like, when that goes away, how do you negotiate in the government contract? You got to deal with all that, right? So that's just what. So it's like an art, I think, but we've gotten better at it. And the second question is about the use of AI, and so we're not using it enough, I think, and we're exploring it for some things like the what I mentioned about the outreach and bringing it together. I think I'd like to use it more testing on implications. Can we speed things up? And so that's somewhere that I'm really focused on. Can we get into the actual accounts? Look at an estimate, speed it up when we don't have data, or speed it up or make it better. And then in our surveys, we have started using it to process our surveys. And so, but it's early days. So not nearly as much as we think. Actually, it's funny. I use it a lot, but this morning did like anecdotes and stuff for stuff like this. So that's been really helpful to me.
This is right.
Oh, there's one also, so I gotta give you this. So I did actually ask, I think it was either Gemini or ChatGPT, because I wanted to give you something for this audience about, because I knew, David was being here, and Andre was gonna be here, and James was here, so some folks are in there. I said, what's the earliest meeting between the US, Australia, and some of the folks that will be here, some of the countries? Because I think everyone knows in the 1940s there was some, and I think 42 there was a meeting of the UK, US, and Canada in Washington for the national accounts. But I actually found out the League of Nations did a lot. US was never a member, right? So we weren't formally part of it. But in 27, I guess they had a big tax conference. and all of us were there. We were observers, but everyone else was there. I thought that was kind of cool. And I know the British Empire had something where they did it in the 1920s. So this is all AI stuff. So I don't know if it's right, but I know I used it for it.
Yes, Darren, please.
Thanks, Vipin, as well, for an excellent presentation. And if I can take you back to your Euro acceleration, which is great happening, by the way. And I'd like to also in the communication of it, because I think that has the potential to kind of cross the different dimensions of quality that you shared. So when you bring the GDP, inflation, your GDP by state measures together, and are you sort of, welcome your thoughts, are you treating them as distinct products? Or are you providing a larger narrative to bring it all together about what it means? And the reason motivation for my question, I think, because I think it talks to another dimension of quality, which is coherence that you referred to, which I think you said is very important. But welcome your thoughts about how you communicate this with all this economic information coming out at the same time.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about that actually. What's the right, way to do this? And so we're going to stick with them as separate products from now on. So personal income will have its own news release. GDP will stay with its own news release. So they both come out at 8:30, whether it's Thursdays usually, but Wednesday or Thursday, but there'll be separate news releases. And the reason for that is because people, particularly the big data users, see them as distinct products right now. I think over time we may start bringing them together, but right now that's the number one reason. Number two is, and one of the things that one of the reasons we've always been hesitant to do this, quarterly data, monthly data, and so. We've talked a lot about, people are smart, like they can figure it out, right? But it's not, there's just a hesitation because one's quarterly, one's monthly. So the short answer is we're going to stick them as separate products for now. I think we'll evaluate and see. For the state GDP, I want it to be seamless. I wanted to look at it and people can look at it and see that there's all the different ways you could look at this, right? You could slice it and dice it. So I think that's a little bit different. And then same thing with the ITAs and the international transactions accounts and the international investment. That's going to be one release, so you can see the flows to the ITAs with the stock together in the same release. That's the idea behind it. So it's kind of a mix, right?
Thanks for me. I'm not sure I said that more engagement connected this.
Anyone else who wants to come in? I'm sorry, David.
This is a bit of a cautionary tale. 10 years ago or 11 years ago, the ABS was made some kind of errors in labour force releases to do with just getting the introduction of new modes, not doing it as well as we should have. And there was an inquiry into this, and one of the recommendations that came out of the inquiry was to delay the release by some time to make sure we got it right. So that kind of sort of counts against some of the things you've been saying. And I absolutely agree that timeliness is one of the elements of quality, no question about it. I do wonder, not wishing this upon you at all, but I do wonder if something gets screwed up, whether you'll have a similar experience.
I think that's absolutely right. There probably is a case to be made for certain products where if you do feel like the accuracy is not what we want to a certain standard, and that's hard to define what that is if it's not a survey product, right? Then we need to wait. I don't know that I see that in any of these products yet, right? But that is
Well, especially if you manage to halve the size of the change from the first to the third release of GDP, that's a spectacular improvement, seems to me.
But I appreciate that because I think that is we have to. I have to keep an open mind that we may have to. But none of us want to do that.
Maybe I can just tag on with a small question myself. I mean, if you think about timeliness, that can be accelerated through faster source data, through AI and internal process improvements. But the third way of doing this is basically modeling and imputing things on a provisional basis. Do you have a policy about this, or is this something that is well accepted also by users, or would that be up for scrutiny, things that revise heavily on?
Yeah, and this is one of those where we do it, particularly in the advanced estimate where we don't have some of the source data. And so it is well accepted by users. I think they are very happy to make, I hesitate to call it trade-off, but they're very happy that we do that so they can get the information faster. And we have also talked about, is there more places we can do it? The income side is one, like we don't get corporate profits is kind of the sticking point for us. We're waiting on some data. Is there ways to do that? But it just depends on the estimate as we've looked into it, right? Because inventories are just really hard, right? And we all know that the income side, it can be really challenging. So I think it's on a case by case. I do think there's an opportunity there to do certain things. So like one thing I didn't mention was the distribution of personal income is something that, the year ends and then we're waiting on source data, so basic tax data, so basically November, and we got to do it really fast, November and December. So what we've got now is we've got an outcast. It's a little bit different than what you were saying, and we're hoping that, the year ends and we'll have it out in February, based on an outcast of that, of that tax data. So we're trying some of these things, and the year would have just ended, right? So we'll release the full year's, advanced estimate of GDP, and then the distribution of personal income, the nowcast, experimental nowcast will come after, and hopefully we can build on that. That's the kind of thing we want to be more of, if it's possible.
Alicia?
Thank you so much for the talk. I'm Alisa Ravel from the University of Queensland. I'm going to tag on to that and models and using models, and ask you about, can we release a little bit of standard errors when we do our first estimates, the advanced estimates, whatever we want to call them? Can we train users to understand that there is statistical uncertainty, and maybe, understanding how big that is will be useful, because they then know that there will be an update, but that update, hopefully within the standard, I don't know. But that is a question that is always in my mind. Why don't we try to give some sort of statistical uncertainty?
It's a good idea. I mean, I think the short answer is, so when you're thinking about like a GDP estimate or something like that, right? It's just at such a disaggregate level that, I worry about what are the resource constraints, because we've had this conversation, and how do you communicate if you're down here and, the metric is up here? These aren't going to aggregate, you know what I mean? They're not going to aggregate up systematically to give you a total error, because you're doing it over here maybe for services and here, so like I just think it's a conceptual challenge to not only to do it, but the resource challenge to do it, conceptual challenge to explain clearly. I'm thinking through some of this on right now, so I don't know. I mean, but we do. There's uncertainty, and it would be useful to communicate that. I'll tell you just an interesting anecdote. Like, for a while I worked at the U.S. National Science Foundation, and we issued a report. The part of it I worked at every year, they used PPP exchange rates, kind of while you're connected with that group. And so, we would present some data to the U.S. National Science Board. And the stat that they always like to see was U.S. R&D versus Chinese R&D. That was what they were focused on, like what do the time series look like? But of course, you had to convert them to PPP exchange rates. And 1 year, they flipped, right? It was there, I think China had been there, then the U.S. overtook them, something like that. And it came down to the PPP exchange rates had been updated. Mm-hmm. And we had this conversation with the science board about, the very question was like, why don't you have, they're all physicists, engineers, why don't you have uncertainty around the estimates? We talked to the World Bank and a bunch of others, but it was just interesting case in point of where people were actually looking for the information that you're talking about in a little bit different context.
Very good. Okay, there's one gentleman up there.
Thanks very much. I'm from the London School of Economics. My name's Peter. So my question is a little bit about the context of what's happening inside organizations like BEA and the ONS, where it seems to me that there's a bit of a reduction in the scope of products. Some of these satellite accounts are being dropped to focus on the core products. But at the same time, the international community around this stuff seems to be extending into newer and weirder and wonderful places. The new SNA is pushing for extensions and scope expansion. So I was wondering, in the context of the sort of international push for ever greater scope of products versus the organizational push towards the core products, how you see these two tensions resolving. Will it ultimately be driven by the internal constraints of BA and so on, or will there be a return to the more experimental side in due course? How do you see that kind of unfolding?
Yeah, I will say I think it's useful to have both. I think a lot of times with our organizations, and this isn't just BEA or any other, you have to be careful not to try to be everything to everyone. So I think that's really important to remember. And so I welcome actually the focus and the return to a focus on core statistics. And so people ask us all the time, and I say, we're focused on core statistics. And the first question is, what does that mean? What does core statistics look like to you? And to me, here's what's required by law. Here's the market movement, what we call principal federal economic indicators. There's the things that move markets, and here's the things that are heavily used in policy. Those are kind of like, that's to me, and I can give you examples of each, that's my core statistics. Beyond that, there's things we'd like to do, but we've got to be careful in spreading ourselves too thin and just not doing things well, right? So I appreciate your question, but I actually welcome a return to a focus on core statistics. I think that's really important. But I also welcome the fact that other people are exploring things and doing research that we someday may find useful and pick up. So that's why I think they work together. It's like, I get this question about private sector data all the time. How do you feel about competing with the private sector? I don't think we're competing with them. I think it's a complement to what we do. The private sector data that you see out there. And there's good reasons why you want both. And I think it's exactly the same here. And I think in the future, just to project out, I think we'll use some of it, but we probably won't use all of it. And so, we don't know what we'll use until we're there. And that's what makes it useful to try all these different things and have that available. And that's actually one of the reasons when I started by talking about how it would be great to have an ESCoE-like entity in the United States. That's one of the reasons why. Is because I think there's other places that can do this, whereas maybe my organization or others static just can't. That makes sense.
Yes, Jerry.
Thanks, Vipin. Great talk. When you were presenting all the changes that were in progress, I was thinking about the management challenges, and clearly you're a very skilled manager, being able to deal with all those changes at the same time. And as a New Zealander, I was delighted to hear that the All Blacks management was the inspiration behind that. I also think the standard is now being set. The other keynote speakers, everyone needs to mention the All Blacks at least once. And a stroke of genius, getting rid of the hated revisions by calling them updates. That's great. The core versus satellite. I do have a bit more of I'd like to have a bit more of a prod about that, because one of the criticisms of the core statistics is they measure everything that's measurable, but not the things which matter. And that's why there's been so much demand from the public for satellite accounts, so we know more about things like home production, etc. Those things are important, and so it sounds like you're dealing with a number of stakeholders, and it sounds like the emphasis that you've presented here is that the Federal Reserve is a key stakeholder for you, and you've put emphasis on what they need to make decisions. That's fair enough. They're not making decisions to make money, they're making decisions to try and improve the economy. So that's fair enough. But there are these other stakeholders who are out there who really value, they want to be seen. They want the government to demonstrate that they understand what's going on that matters to them. So I am concerned that and I know you're resource constrained, you can't do everything. These, the new things you're introducing are fabulous, but there's a cost to it, and I'm sure you're aware of that. But that's just another little problem. I know you've already answered it, but I do just want to have my say on that. One other thing, innovative data sources. Like, I didn't hear you talk about using new technology to speed things up. Are you using things like bank card data to improve estimates? I mean, is a speeding up all happening because of technological advances, or businesses reporting more quickly, or is it also through use of innovative data sources?
So let me start with the innovative data. Thank you for that. One of the data sources, we're not using as much as we should be or could be. And really, you have to buy the data source. And then we used to use credit card data, but this was 2 years ago now, we had budget reductions, and those are no longer there. And that was a lot of people, and we would then publish them public on our website too, and we use them to help speed things up. We're not using that. We've actually cut our data purchases a fair bit over the last 2 years, but it really started 2 years ago with the budget reductions we took. So because as you all know, I mean, these things aren't cheap, and you have to test them. You don't know what you're going to use, and it's a tricky business. And so we're just not doing as much there as we could be or should be, and hopefully we'll get back to some of that. And I really do hope we'll get back to some of that. So, but some of these gains, I think. I think it's a combination, but the IT modernization piece has been absolutely critical for us, and it is. It's just been revolutionary. So we do, talk about the estimates. I'm sorry to give you all these details, but I just want to put it in context. At BA, we have these updates, these 3 updates, and we do an annual update once a year, and then we do what's called a comprehensive update, which is basically a benchmarking to the U.S. economic census every 5 years. Well, in 2008, running one run of a comprehensive update, there's all these matrices in there, you got balance, all this stuff going on, for 24 hours. 2008. This year we can do it in 10 minutes. That's IT modernization, right? So that's all IT. And so that's the kind of thing that we've been able to have a lot of success with on the IT side. And the last thing I will say is, you can't underestimate the motivation, just of a talented and dedicated staff. I mean, all of us have this, right? They are motivated to do these things. People, at least that I deal with at BA, want to get better. This really matters. It's like, the mission really matters, and we talk a lot about that. And so I think you can't underestimate how important that is, that people are motivated and they want to get up and get it done. And when they're hearing from their friends, who want things faster or more detail or whatnot, I think it really motivates them.
Very good. I think this brings us nicely to the end of this keynote session. I'd like to thank you all for your interventions and questions, but of course, even more so, Vipin for his presentation and answer. So let's give him another hand before we take a break. We will convene at 11:45, correctly?